Next, we're going to have a panel discussion with the title of Innovation Without Borders, How Global Trends in Innovation and Venture Capital Can Be Leveraged to Benefit Entrepreneurs Beyond Silicon Valley. So we'll ask this. Here they come now. So leading this chat will be Raj Ganguly, co-founder and partner of B Capital Group, and he'll be chatting with Eduardo Saverin, who is co-founder of Facebook and co-founder and partner of B Capital Group. I don't think Eduardo needs much introduction, but I'll allow you, Raj, to take it from here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and good morning. Hopefully everyone can hear us. We're really excited to be here at Super Return today with all of you, sitting here in Hong Kong. And wanted to start off by introducing my co-founder and partner, Eduardo Saverin, who most of you have probably never heard of. Eduardo was born and raised in Brazil. He went to high school and college in the US and currently lives in Singapore. While you were in college, you pursued some entrepreneurial activities, co-founded Facebook, and since then you've been investing and backing entrepreneurs globally. Thank you for joining us today.
Of course, and I'm super excited to be here today, but without further ado, I'll introduce my partner as well. He was born in India, raised in the US. He started a fintech company and actually lived through the dot-com bubble. He then sort of pursued consulting with large corporations globally, then joined Bain Capital, both in their US and Asia funds, and more recently joined as a senior advisor to the Boston Consulting Group, who's a strategic partner to B Capital Group, our current fund. And over the last 5 years, I had the pleasure of working with you and investing with you as we build the B Capital platform. So Raj, to get started, I know, knowing you so well personally, I know that as a venture investor, you live a life today of consistent jet lag, and the airplane in some ways has become your second home. I would love to get your views on how technology innovation is evolving in the world, and particularly through the lens of globalization.
Yeah, it's obviously one of my favorite questions, so thanks for starting with it. Tech has changed a lot in the last 20 years since I started in this industry. 20 years ago, it was still primarily Silicon Valley and US-based. The vast majority of startups and entrepreneurs either came from there or had to go to there. And what we've seen in the last 20 years is obviously the rise of China as the second largest venture capital market. But beyond China, you look at places like Israel, Indonesia, India, and frankly, even places like London and Dublin, Ireland, and Budapest, some of the places that we've been spending time in outside of Asia and the US. It's a different model of innovation that you're finding from Silicon Valley. I mean, Silicon Valley's got a cross-vertical layer of innovation. It's still a phenomenal place. But let me take two examples of two cities that our team's been spending some time in recently. First, Manila. It's not very far from here. It's a great city. And what you see in Manila is that just 25 years ago, they got their first call center. And in that 25 years, they've become somewhat the call center capital of the world, rivaling India. Those call centers over time started to invest heavily in technology. That technology investment gave rise to a need for lots of engineering and coding and programming talent, and that in turn has led to a boom in their startup ecosystem. Or take a place like Budapest. I mean, Budapest for the past 100 years has been a center of innovation for auto manufacturing. A lot of people don't know about it and focus more on Germany, but even the German automakers have moved lots of their operations to Budapest. There's over 400 auto manufacturing companies in Hungary today, mainly in and around Budapest. And if you look at the huge amount of innovation going on in transportation in the auto space, some of the best startups and entrepreneurs that we're finding in the space aren't just in Silicon Valley, but they're in places like Budapest. good part of our team is in Budapest this week because we're so excited about some of the autonomous car technology that we're seeing there. So I think that's the model of innovation that we're seeing outside of the Valley and maybe outside of China. I think it's a really exciting model. It leads to me being on a plane a lot, but the privilege of spending time with great entrepreneurs, I think, makes it all worthwhile. So let me ask you a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is how is all this globalization and democratization of technology, how's it actually impacting the pace of innovation that we're seeing across industries?
No, that's a great question. And the pace of innovation is certainly accelerating. But to actually think about why, maybe we should go down the path of history and understand some of the past cycles of innovation that have led to where we are today. So you started, of course, with the first and second industrial revolution. This was all about, mechanical innovations to replace the steam engine. You then had the scientific revolution that laid the groundwork to the personal computing era. And all these early cycles of innovation were about one technology displacing the next technology. Right, and post the era of the PC, you then had connectivity and getting connected to the web. And this was, something that sprung into action, massive growth in digital technologies around media and communication. Frankly, Facebook, Google were all part of this wave. And with connectivity, you then have the era of mobility. Right? I think today we have over 7 billion mobile devices in the world. I think for the first time, mobile penetration has actually passed fixed line. But it's not just the ubiquity of mobility that is phenomenal, it's also the power that we're putting in people's hands. Right? Meaning today, individuals have more computing power than we had to take the first man to the moon. And with connectivity and mobility comes the explosion of data. And it's true explosion, acceleration of the level of data that we're building. From actually 2014 to 2016, we saw 9 times the amount of data that existed in the world previously. But with all this explosion of data, the question comes, what do you do with it? So then comes the era of analytics. And really the first iterations of this is how do you take historical data and personalize the experience? In some ways, you bring segmentation down to one single individual. Facebook in the early days, and one of its signature features till today, Newsfeed, was about taking the national newspaper, the local newspaper, down to an individualized newspaper made for you. But today, it's all about beyond analytics to the era of artificial intelligence. Right, and this has been a phenomenon, in the science fiction realm for a very long period of time. We've talked about neural networks all the way dating back to the 60s. And today, really, it's when you're starting the very early iterations of this coming to be with the deployment of semiconductor technology, high data platforms coming to scale. But really, what you've seen in these past cycles of evolutions from mobility down to artificial intelligence is unlike the early cycles where you had technology displacing one another. These technologies are building and stacking on top of each other. And this is the driver of acceleration. In fact, if you think about Facebook in today's world and our growth, we would be termed turtles. And that's because it took us 4 years to reach 100 million consumers. Instagram took about 2 years. One of the early applications on top of the Facebook platform, gaming, and one of these companies, Zynga, put a game out called Cityville. They reached 100 million active players within 40 days. Pokemon Go, which I'm sure many of you have tried, was 30 days across the iOS and Android platform. And even here locally in this part of the world, you've seen the transportation platforms like Didi that ultimately became Didi Kwai attaching on to WeChat and growing to 5 million rides per day and scaling rapidly into the largest transportation platform in the world very quickly. So platforms on top of platforms equals acceleration. And it's super exciting. So Raj, we've been talking about globalization. We've been talking about the power of platforms. Can you tell me from a venture capital hat, and I know you love to wear hats, how you take advantage of these trends?
Listen, I think as an industry, and I don't want to spend too much time, I know our clock's going to run down in terms of how our industry is evolving. But I think there's so many of our friends in venture who have leveraged a model that's worked really well, which is that they invest in their local city or they invest in their country, largely driven by information advantages and really kind of knowing that space really well. I think that's a really successful model and one that will continue to be successful. I do think that, though, this globalization of technology will lead to an emergence of a new model of venture. And that model will be much more global. I think what we've been doing, the team that we have, we've always had a global first mentality. I think our belief is that technology, driven by many of the things that you just talked about, the second information revolution, these platform technologies, I think what it means is that technology is starting to impact more industries than ever before. And many of these industries are really exciting, big industries that have been slow to adopt technology. And in these industries, I think the companies that are being built can truly be global from day one. And so the model of venture that we've been using is one where we invest in great entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs who already have some traction. Often they've raised some capital from a local venture capital firm. And our focus has been that while a lot of the industry is changing, what's not changing is what makes a great entrepreneur and then what those great entrepreneurs look for. My belief is that great entrepreneurs are looking for value-add investors and capital. There's a lot of capital in this world today. And the value that I think many entrepreneurs are looking for is how can you help accelerate their path to market? And a model which works and is working more and more is how do you break down the silos between the startups that we know and the place that we start off our careers in with leading global corporates. How do you get them to work together? Because both sides have unique advantages, and especially in these industries that tech is starting to impact, they're heavily regulated. You need access to capital. Distribution channels to large amounts of customers are important for winning. And if you can bring those two sides together, have them partner, and you can go global much faster, you can get to higher amount of customers faster. Customer acquisition cost has been one of the key issues in the startup ecosystem. I think that's an emerging model. It's the model that we believe in. And I think it'll be a new model for global technology investment. So to move from the global theme for a moment, since we are sitting here today at Super Return Asia, and I know you've been here for a long time. You live in Singapore, not too far from here. Let me ask you a little bit, what brought you to Asia and to Singapore, and what excites you today about the ecosystem here, and what keeps you here in Asia?
Oh, great question. Meaning, my early I would say, entry into Asia in part was based on my just exploratory nature, and partly based on a highly informed whim. And that's because in the early days of Facebook, I was just absolutely fascinated by the fact that the second largest country by usage happened to be Indonesia. So when I started investing in technology entrepreneurs, I wanted to come to the region, learn as much as I could, and see how I could get involved. And what I planned initially was, a few weeks, month or so trip. Ended up being quite a long permanent stay. A large part of that is due to meeting my beautiful wife and building a family out in the region in Singapore. But also now, 8 years in, I continue to be increasingly fascinated by the tech ecosystem locally. Meaning at a really top level, if you just look at the scale of the opportunity in Asia broadly, it's huge. Meaning I'm preaching to the choir here in Hong Kong, but above having a large and growing middle class, a truly mobile-first environment where in some places you have 2 to 4 times the level of mobile connectivity than even in developed economies, to also a region where in parts you have a lack of infrastructure that interestingly breeds 0 to 1 innovation. It's a fascinating market, but to go down further into detail, maybe I'll focus on Singapore and the region around Singapore, Southeast Asia. It's a market that truly resonates the mobile first, right? You're talking about over 600 million people, 700 million plus mobile devices, with a very fast rate of people getting connected to the web. In fact, I heard a while back staggering statistics that close to 120,000 new people were getting connected and hooked onto the web per day. And this is with a very large and growing population that is incredibly young. You have close to 70% of the people under the age of 40. So on top of that, beyond these, what you would say, mobility and demographic tailwinds, you also have a market that is undersaturated in the respect of venture, especially if you think about later stage and growth venture capital. Actually, if you look at Southeast Asia, in the past several years, you had about 90% of deals being done in the seed and A rounds versus slightly under 60% in the US. That presents a phenomenal opportunity for B Capital that invests in the C and B rounds to be competitive in the region. But really getting into why I'm fascinated by Southeast Asia, above and beyond these typical tailwinds, interestingly, it's the extent of the challenges that makes this an incredibly dynamic market, right? You have, at a top level, a heterogeneous market. You have to cross boundaries of language and country lines. You have an emerging talent ecosystem, but not fully developed. You have a payment infrastructure not yet fully in place. You have infrastructure both in terms of internet connectivity speed and logistics that is still in the development phases, and even what I would say a broader lack of trust today on the internet, especially when you're crossing country lines. But these challenges are actually what makes the opportunity fascinating for entrepreneurs and makes the problems that they need to solve incredibly challenging. If you want to build an e-commerce platform in Southeast Asia, you don't just need to think about the typical supply-demand dynamics of a marketplace. You have to think about the payments infrastructure, the logistics underlying your business, and how to overcome trust barrier across geographical lines. In fact, I'm pretty convinced across Asia broadly that this is the best place in the world today to be an entrepreneur. And that's because of the size of the challenges, the difficulty of the problems, and ultimately the magnitude of the opportunity if you're able to solve it. In Southeast Asia, you've seen early signs of success with the unicorns like Garena going public today, Lazada, and others. But it's beyond exciting. And I go too long, apologies.
Great, thank you. So,
Raj, sorry, I should ask you a question. So going back to the corporate startup relationship, it's a fascinating thesis at a top level, but these are inherently unequal entities. Why would they want to work together and explain a little bit about why you think this type of partnership is feasible going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've learned a lot in the last 5 years of doing this. I think one of the biggest learnings has been that you can find the best technology, startup, product, entrepreneurial team, and you can bring them to a leading global corporate, and you really believe that there's opportunity to build a powerful partnership. And sometimes they get into the room and you sit there and it just sounds like they're speaking different languages. I almost feel like part of our job has become to be a little bit of the translation layer between corporates and startups. I always think about the story of one of our early investments, which was in the auto space. A group of engineers who built great technology that could help control the car. They went and they spoke with one of the largest auto manufacturers in the world, and it seemed like it was a great conversation, and at the end of it, the auto manufacturer said, "This is great, thanks for coming in, but we have our own project. We're working on this technology ourselves. We have 300 engineers. We're gonna crack this ourselves, this problem, by the time you guys solve it." And I remember the team saying, "Oh no, we didn't come here to show you guys a PowerPoint presentation. We've already solved it." And these guys were like, "Wait a moment, you have 8 engineers. How could you guys have solved it? We've got 300 people." And as the conversation progressed, we learned that the large auto manufacturer, that the engineers there after a year hadn't really even started working on the project because of security concerns, their upstream guys hadn't really even given the security codes to the group that was working on this project. So even though the executive team thought that, we've kicked off this initiative, we have hundreds of engineers working on it, we're going to solve it in 4 to 5 years, a small group of 8 engineers had basically already figured this out. They'd figured out how to control a car from your mobile phone. And I know we're doing a lot more than that today, but it was an example of you got to show each side the value of working together, and it can't just be a conversation. I think another thing we've learned is, taking that example, that part of what helps in them working together is making sure that you're making the introduction at the right time. The entrepreneurs, the startup actually having a product, having something that they can share, because when you can solve a pain point for a large company, and at the end of the day, when it helps improve the experience of the end customer, I think that's a language that everyone understands. And so I think more and more, we've learned that how do you get them to communicate better? What's the right stage to take it at? But the power of these partnerships in terms of the way we've seen startups that have been around for 3-4 years and with a lot of funding have acquired 1 million, 2 million customers, and just one partnership with a large company, just the pilot of that partnership, tripling the number of customers that they had, the amount of data that they got, how it let the startup scale, and really become kind of a leader in what they were doing overnight, I think is a really powerful model for startups that are looking for that kind of partnership.
Mindful of the time, maybe we'll do one last question.
Yeah, so I had heard from some folks before we got on stage that they had a question for you, which is, apparently, since you were the first investor in Facebook, I heard that worked out to be a pretty good investment. We're in a room with a lot of great investors, and I thought you can give some advice to folks on where's the next Facebook, and how can you help everyone here find it?
It's a hard one, but not so hard at a top level. I think if you're asking me, are we going to see businesses that are as big at scale as Facebook, Google? I think the answer is absolutely yes, and it's simple to understand why. At a top level, you have these companies starting to touch markets that are significantly larger in size. If you think about where Facebook played in the early days in the media and communications market versus some of the industries that are being impacted today, like logistics, healthcare, financial services, some of these $15 trillion plus industries, you can only imagine the scale that these startups can get. Second, goes back to the point around acceleration and the accelerating pace of innovation. And third is the simple fact that global first is a mantra today in the startup world. It's just incredibly easier to scale globally from day one and build businesses that are much larger than they would have been in the past. So I think it's a fascinating time to be an investor in technology. We're less than 1% of the way, in my view, as to how technology is going to impact the world. And I look forward, frankly, to working with, meeting entrepreneurs, and finding the next Facebook out there.
Very well, thank you, and thanks to everyone here. I know we are standing between everyone and lunch, so unfortunately we don't have time for questions. We'll be at lunch and look forward to speaking to many people there.
Great. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you, Raj, Eduardo.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Well, actually, one more session before lunch. So.